You will not believe what happens to the girl at the end. Make sure to like and subscribe so we can continue writing stories like this one. I would love to hear your thoughts in the comments below.
In the grand yet drafty Baron von Hesse resided in his ancestral manor. He was not a kind man. His face was etched with wrinkles of worry, not laughter, and his heart seemed as cold as the stone walls of his castle. He wasn't always this way, or so the oldest villagers whispered. But years of managing the estate, of dealing with taxes and tenants, had hardened him. What truly occupied his thoughts day and night was his will. He had no sons, only a daughter, Liesel, and he was determined to control what would happen to his land after he was gone. He wanted the estate to remain intact as it had for generations, but worried about its future. Liesel, a girl of 10 summers, was a quiet child often overlooked. Her mother had passed away when she was very young, and the Baron, consumed by his duties, hadn't known how to raise a daughter. Liesel spent her days wandering the castle halls and the surrounding fields, finding solace in the company of the animals and the stories she created in her own head. She longed for someone to share those stories with, someone to read to her. The Baron saw her as a sweet child but paid her little attention. He believed her time was best spent learning needlepoint and other ladylike pursuits, not reading or engaging in fanciful ideas. So, Liesel remained largely alone, a small, almost invisible figure in the vast estate. She yearned for connection, for knowledge, for something more than the lonely existence she knew. Then came Anna, a woman from a land far across the sea, with sun-kissed skin and eyes the color of the summer sky. She arrived in a carriage, a small trunk her only possession. The Baron had sent for her through a mail-order bride service, hoping for a wife who would manage the household and perhaps, in time, provide him with an heir. He saw it as a practical arrangement, a solution to his loneliness and a way to secure the future of his estate. Anna was younger than he expected, barely more than a girl herself. She was polite and quiet, but there was a spark in her eyes that hinted at a spirit unyielding. She spoke little of her past, only that she had come from a small village and sought a better life. The Baron, preoccupied with his papers and anxieties, paid her little mind beyond the necessary introductions. He showed her to her chambers and explained her duties. Anna listened attentively, but her gaze often drifted to the windows, to the rolling hills and the distant forests. She yearned to explore this new land, to learn its secrets. She also noticed Liesel, the Baron's daughter, a silent shadow flitting through the halls. Anna felt a pang of sympathy for the girl, sensing her loneliness and her thirst for connection. She knew in that instant that her role in this household would be more than just a wife to the Baron. One afternoon, Liesel, drawn by a sliver of light filtering through the cracks in the hayloft door, crept inside. The air was thick with the scent of dried hay, and dust motes danced in the sunbeams. In the corner, perched on an overturned crate, sat Anna. She wasn't overseeing the stable hands as one might expect. Instead, she held a small, worn book, her lips moving silently as she read. Liesel had never seen anyone reading for pleasure. Her father only read legal documents, his brow furrowed in concentration. The sight of Anna, lost in the pages of a book, captivated her. As Liesel stepped further into the loft, a floorboard creaked beneath her weight. Anna looked up, startled. Her eyes widened as she saw Liesel standing there, her expression a mixture of curiosity and longing. "Oh," Anna said softly, closing the book. "I didn't realize anyone was here." Liesel, emboldened by Anna's gentle tone, stepped forward. "What are you doing?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. Anna smiled, a warm, genuine smile that reached her eyes. "I'm reading," she replied, holding up the book. It was a simple primer meant for teaching children the alphabet and basic words. It was old and discarded, missing its cover, but Anna treasured it. Liesel's eyes grew wide. Can you teach me?" she asked, the words tumbling out in a rush. "My father says it's not important, but I want to learn." Anna hesitated for only a moment. She knew the Baron's views on education for women, especially his own daughter. But looking into Liesel's earnest face, she couldn't refuse. "I would be happy to, Liesel," she said, her voice soft but firm. "But we must keep it a secret. Your father wouldn't approve." Liesel nodded eagerly, her eyes shining with excitement. "I promise," she whispered. "No one will know." And so their secret lessons began. In the afternoons, when the Baron was occupied with estate business, Liesel would sneak away to the hayloft. Anna would be waiting, the old primer open on her lap. They started with the alphabet, Anna patiently guiding Liesel through each letter, sounding out the words. Liesel was a quick learner, her mind hungry for knowledge. She soaked up the words like a sponge, her eyes lighting up with each new discovery. Anna found joy in teaching her, reliving the wonder of learning through Liesel's eyes. It was a welcome escape from the drudgery of her duties and the coldness of the Baron. The hayloft became their sanctuary, a place where they could share stories and dreams away from the watchful eyes of the household. It was a bond forming between them stronger than either of them could have imagined. A bond built on shared secrets and the love of learning. As Liesel progressed beyond the basics, Anna noticed her keen interest in the documents her father often left lying around, contracts, ledgers, and estate papers filled with unfamiliar words. Instead of focusing solely on fairy tales and poems from the primer, Anna, with a practical wisdom born of necessity, decided to incorporate these words into their lessons. This word is tenant, Anna explained one day, pointing to a word in one of the Baron's agreements. It means someone who lives on and farms the land, paying rent to your father. Liesel frowned. Tenant? She repeated, slowly sounding it out. But what is rent? And so, Anna began to explain the complex workings of the estate, the responsibilities of the Baron, and the lives of the people who depended on his land. She didn't sugarcoat the truth, but presented it in a way that Liesel could understand. Liesel learned about contracts, obligations, and inheritance before she ever learned about princes, dragons, or castles. At first, Liesel found the contract words difficult and dry, but Anna made them interesting by connecting them to the real people and places she knew. She showed Liesel how these words affected the lives of the villagers, how they determined their livelihoods and their futures. Slowly, Liesel began to understand the power that words held, the power to shape lives and destinies. She realized that reading wasn't just about stories and entertainment, it was about understanding the world around her. The hayloft, with its rough-hewn beams and dusty floor, became their classroom. Sunlight streamed through the gaps in the walls, illuminating the scattered hay, and the two figures bent over the worn primer. The air hummed with the busy sounds of the farm, the clucking of chickens, the mooing of cows, and the distant shouts of the stable hands. These sounds, once unnoticed by Liesel, now formed a comforting backdrop to their secret world. To maintain their secrecy, Anna and Liesel developed a system. Liesel would leave a small, white stone on the windowsill of her room as a signal that she was free to meet. Anna, seeing the stone, would make her way to the hayloft, ensuring no one was watching. They always kept a lookout, ready to hide the book and pretend they were simply playing if anyone approached. The biggest challenge was the Baron's housekeeper, a stern woman named Frau Schmidt, who had a sharp eye and a suspicious nature. She seemed to be everywhere at once, and Anna and Liesel had several close calls, narrowly avoiding detection. One afternoon, Frau Schmidt entered the stable looking for Anna. Liesel quickly grabbed the primer and hid it under her skirt just as Frau Schmidt's shadow fell across the loft entrance. Anna smoothly engaged Frau Schmidt in conversation, distracting her long enough for Liesel to slip away unnoticed. The close call only strengthened their resolve. They were determined to continue their lessons, no matter the risk. One day, while studying a particularly dense contract regarding land usage, Liesel stumbled upon a clause that made her frown. Anna, she said, pointing to a line of text. What does this mean? It says that if the harvest is poor, the tenants must give up a portion of their land to the Baron. Anna's face grew grave. She knew this clause well. It was a common practice, but often resulted in hardship for the tenants, especially in years when the weather was unkind. It means, she explained carefully, that if the harvest isn't good enough, your father can take some of their land. Liesel looked troubled. But what will they do? How will they feed their families? Anna sighed. It can be very difficult for them, she admitted. Sometimes they have to sell their livestock or borrow money just to survive. Liesel was silent for a moment, absorbing this information. She thought of the families she knew in the village, the children she sometimes played with. She imagined them going hungry, losing their homes. A spark of anger flickered within her. That's not fair, she said, her voice trembling slightly. It's not fair that my father can take their land just because the harvest is bad. Anna nodded. No, Liesel, it isn't always fair, she agreed. But that's the way things are. Landowners often have a lot of power. Liesel was determined to understand more. She started asking Anna more questions about the contracts, about the tenants, about the way the estate was managed. The more she learned, the more she realized that things weren't always just as they seemed. As the weeks turned into months, Anna and Liesel's bond deepened. Anna became more than just a teacher. She was a confidant, a friend, and a mother figure to Liesel, filling the void left by her own mother's passing. They would share stories and laughter in the hayloft, their voices echoing softly amidst the rustling hay. Anna would tell Liesel tales of her homeland, of its vibrant culture and warm-hearted people. Liesel, in turn, would share her dreams and fears, her hopes for a better future. The Baron, still absorbed in his own world, remained largely oblivious to the growing connection between his daughter and his wife. He saw that Liesel was happier, more engaged, but attributed it to Anna's presence in the household. He was pleased that Anna was fulfilling her duties, keeping the house in order and tending to Liesel's needs, but he didn't delve deeper. Anna, in turn, subtly challenged some of the Baron's long-held beliefs around how his estate was being run. She never outright told him that he was wrong, but she did plant seeds of doubt, raising small objections here and there, enough to make him stop and think. One evening, as they sat by the fire, Anna noticed Liesel sketching in a notebook. "What are you drawing, Liesel?" she asked gently. Liesel blushed and hesitated before showing Anna her work. It was a drawing of the village, but with changes. The houses were bigger, the fields were greener, and the people's faces were filled with smiles. "I wish it could be like this," Liesel whispered. "I wish everyone could be happy." Anna smiled sadly and put her arm around the child. She knew somehow that Liesel was destined for great things. The Baron, however, began to ail. A persistent cough racked his body, leaving him weak and breathless. He spent more and more time confined to his bed, his face pale and drawn. The estate manager, a shifty-eyed man named Kruger, took over many of the Baron's duties, and Anna noticed he often looked at Liesel with a calculating eye. The Baron's obsession with his will intensified as his health declined. He called for his lawyer frequently, poring over the document, making small adjustments, and fretting over every detail. The will, he believed, was the only thing that mattered now, the only way to ensure his legacy. One afternoon, Anna found Liesel sitting by the Baron's bedside, reading to him from a book. It wasn't the primer, it was a collection of fairy tales, the kind Liesel had once yearned for. But her voice was flat, and her eyes lacked their usual spark. "How is he?" Anna asked softly when Liesel emerged from the room. Liesel shook her head. "He's very weak," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "He keeps talking about the will. He says it's the most important thing." Anna sighed. She knew the Baron's obsession was consuming him, blinding him to the things that truly mattered. His daughter, his tenants, his own well-being. She knew that something had to be done, but she wasn't sure what. The clock was ticking, and the Baron's health was failing fast. The time to act was drawing near. One evening, under the guise of bringing the Baron warm milk, Anna slipped into his room. Liesel was already there, sitting quietly by his bedside. The Baron was propped up against several pillows, his breathing labored. He looked frail, almost translucent. "He wants me to read the will again," Liesel whispered to Anna, her eyes filled with worry. Anna nodded and approached the bed. "Perhaps it would soothe him, Liesel," she said to the Baron, her voice gentle. "The sound of your voice always seems to bring him peace." The Baron, his eyes half closed, nodded weakly. "Yes, read it," he rasped. "Read it one last time." Liesel hesitated, then picked up the heavy document. She knew the will almost by heart now, every clause, every sentence etched into her memory. As she began to read, her voice trembled slightly. She scanned the familiar words, her eyes searching for the clauses that she knew were unfair, the ones that would bring hardship to the tenants. Suddenly she stopped. Her eyes had landed on a particularly harsh passage, one that stipulated that any tenant who failed to meet their quota for 2 consecutive years would be evicted from their land, regardless of the circumstances. This clause, more than any other, filled her with dread. She knew that a bad harvest was looming, and many families would be unable to meet their quotas. This clause would leave them destitute. She looked at Anna, her eyes pleading. Anna gave her a small, almost imperceptible nod. The time had come. They had to act. Anna and Liesel retreated to the hayloft. The heavy will clutched tightly in Liesel's hands. The setting sun cast long shadows across the floor, creating an atmosphere of urgency. "We have to do something, Anna," Liesel said, her voice trembling. "We can't let him evict those families. They'll have nowhere to go." Anna nodded, her brow furrowed in thought. "I know, Liesel, but what can we do? Your father is a stubborn man. He won't listen to reason." "But he listens to me," Liesel said, a spark of determination in her eyes. "He trusts me. He thinks I'm just a child, but he trusts my voice." Anna looked at Liesel, a plan forming in her mind. "You're right, Liesel," she said slowly. "He does trust you. And he's very weak now. He's not paying close attention to the words themselves, just the sound of your voice." They looked at each other, a silent understanding passing between them. They knew the risk they were taking, the potential consequences if they were caught. But they also knew that they couldn't stand by and let the barons will destroy the lives of so many innocent people. We'll have to be very careful, Anna said, her voice firm. We'll have to choose our moments wisely. And we'll have to be prepared for anything. Liesel nodded, her heart pounding in her chest. She knew that what they were about to do was dangerous, but she was ready. She was ready to use her newfound knowledge and her father's trust to protect the people she cared about. She was ready to rewrite his will. The next morning, Anna approached the Baron with a carefully crafted suggestion. My lord, she said, her voice soft and respectful. Liesel has been so worried about your health. She finds comfort in reading the will to you. Perhaps if she read it aloud one last time, it would bring you peace and reassurance. The Baron, weak and increasingly dependent on Anna, considered her words. He did find comfort in Liesel's voice, in the familiar rhythm of the legal language. And the thought of securing his legacy one final time was appealing. Very well, he said, his voice raspy. Let her read it. But make sure she reads it clearly. I want to hear every word. Anna smiled, her heart pounding with a mixture of fear and hope. Of course, my lord, she said. I will make sure of it. She found Liesel in the garden, tending to a small patch of flowers. It's time, Anna said, her voice barely a whisper. He wants you to read the will again. Liesel's eyes widened, but she nodded resolutely. She knew what she had to do. Together, they returned to the Baron's room, the heavy will weighing heavily in Liesel's hands. As they entered the room, Kruger, the estate manager, was standing by the Baron's bedside. He gave Anna and Liesel a suspicious look. What's this about? He asked, his voice sharp. The Baron needs his rest. Anna met his gaze steadily. The Baron has requested that Liesel read to him, she said, her voice firm. It is his wish. Kruger hesitated, then stepped aside, his eyes narrowed. Anna knew that he suspected something, but she couldn't let him stop them. The fate of the tenants, and perhaps the future of the estate, depended on it. Liesel took a deep breath and began to read, her voice clear and steady despite the tremor in her hands. Kruger remained standing near the door, his arms crossed, his eyes fixed on Liesel. Anna stood behind Liesel, offering silent encouragement. As Liesel reached the dreaded clause about evicting tenants, she paused for a moment, her heart pounding in her chest. She glanced at Anna, who gave her the slightest of nods. Taking another deep breath, Liesel continued. But this time, her voice was different. Instead of reading, any tenant who fails to meet their quota for 2 consecutive years will be evicted. She said, any tenant who, through unforeseen circumstances such as illness or natural disaster, is unable to meet their quota, will be given assistance and support to ensure their well-being. Kruger frowned, his eyes narrowing even further. He seemed to sense that something was amiss, but he couldn't quite put his finger on it. The Baron, however, seemed oblivious. His eyes closed, his face relaxed. He was only half listening, lulled by the sound of his daughter's voice. Liesel continued to read, subtly altering the wording of other clauses, softening the harsh edges, and adding provisions for the tenant's welfare. She spoke slowly and deliberately, careful to maintain the rhythm and cadence of the original text. It was a delicate dance, a high-stakes gamble that could change the lives of so many. The Baron, lost in the haze of his illness, stirred slightly. Are you finished yet, Liesel? He mumbled, his voice weak. It's a long document. Almost, Papa, Liesel replied, her voice sweet and reassuring. She had reached the section detailing the distribution of his personal belongings, his furniture, his artwork, his collection of rare books. She knew that Kruger was particularly interested in this section as he had long coveted several items. Taking a deep breath, Liesel began to read. But this time, she added a new clause, one that had never been in the will before. And to my loyal tenants, she said, her voice ringing with sincerity, I bequeath a portion of my personal library, so that they may have access to knowledge and wisdom. Kruger gasped, his face turning red with anger. What did you say? He demanded, stepping forward. That's not in the will. Anna stepped in front of Liesel, shielding her from Kruger's wrath. The Baron is adding a codicil, she said calmly, her eyes meeting Kruger's gaze unflinchingly. He has decided to share his wealth with those who have served him faithfully. The Baron, roused by the commotion, opened his eyes. Is there a problem? He asked, his voice weak but firm. Anna turned to him, her expression soothing. No, my lord, she said. Liesel is simply finishing the reading. She is doing a wonderful job. The Baron nodded slowly, his eyes closing again. Continue, Liesel, he murmured. Continue. With Kruger's eyes boring into her, Liesel continued reading, her voice gaining confidence with each altered clause. She reached the section outlining the rights to the watermill, a source of constant contention between the Baron and the Miller family. Instead of confirming the Baron's absolute ownership, Liesel inserted a passage ensuring the Miller family's continued access to the mill, granting them shared rights in perpetuity. She then came to the final paragraph, the one that declared the will to be the Baron's final testament and instructed all to abide by its terms. This was their last chance to make a significant change. Taking a deep breath, Liesel began to read, her voice filled with emotion. And finally she said, "It is my greatest wish that all the tenants on my land shall be treated with fairness, kindness, and respect. I hereby name each of them by name, the Miller family, the Schmidt family, the Weber family." She continued, listing every tenant family on the estate, her voice ringing with conviction. With each name she added a guarantee of their rights to their land, their homes, and their livelihoods. She spoke with such passion and sincerity that even Kruger seemed momentarily swayed, his anger momentarily forgotten. The Baron, his eyes still closed, smiled faintly. That's good, Liesel," he murmured. "You have a kind heart." He didn't understand the specifics of what she was saying, but the sound of her voice filled him with a sense of peace. Anna gave Liesel a look of encouragement. It was time for the final act. Anna gently took the Baron's hand and placed the quill in it. "My lord," she said softly, "Liesel has finished reading. Now you must sign the will to make it official." The Baron, his eyes barely open, nodded weakly. He felt a strange sense of peace, a feeling he hadn't experienced in years. He trusted Liesel, he trusted Anna, and he trusted the sound of his daughter's voice. With a trembling hand, he scrawled his signature at the bottom of the will, barely able to make out the letters. Kruger watched with barely concealed fury, knowing that his plans were crumbling before his eyes. As the Baron finished signing, a wave of exhaustion washed over him. He closed his eyes and let out a long, sighing breath. Anna quickly removed the quill from his hand and placed it back on the table. "Thank you, Liesel," the Baron whispered, his voice fading. "You have made me very happy." Liesel smiled, tears welling up in her eyes. She had done it. She had rewritten his will, not with ink, but with her voice, with her knowledge, and with her love for the people of the estate. Anna and Liesel exchanged a look of relief and triumph. They had faced a great risk, but they had succeeded. They had protected the tenants and secured a brighter future for the estate. But their journey was far from over. They knew that Kruger would not give up easily, and they had to be prepared for whatever he might do. But for now, they allowed themselves a moment of quiet celebration, a moment of gratitude for the power of words and the strength of their bond. The hayloft awaited. The Baron lingered for a few more days, his body slowly giving way. He slipped in and out of consciousness, sometimes recognizing Liesel and Anna, sometimes lost in his own memories. Kruger remained a constant presence, hovering in the shadows, his eyes filled with a mixture of anxiety and greed. Finally, one morning, the Baron passed away peacefully in his sleep, with Liesel and Anna by his side. He had never known that his will had been altered, that his legacy was not what he had intended. He died believing that he had secured the future of his estate, unaware that his daughter and his wife had rewritten his story. The news of the Baron's death spread quickly through the village. The tenants mourned his passing, but they also felt a sense of unease. They knew that Kruger would likely become the new master of the estate, and they feared his harsh rule. As the preparations for the funeral began, Kruger wasted no time in asserting his authority. He began issuing orders, tightening restrictions, and making life difficult for the tenants. He was determined to undo the changes that Liesel and Anna had made to reclaim what he believed was rightfully his. Anna and Liesel knew that they had to act quickly. The future of the estate and the well-being of the tenants depended on it. The will was their only weapon, and they had to ensure that it was read aloud and that its true contents were revealed before Kruger could seize control. The stage was set for a final showdown. The day of the will reading arrived, and the great hall of the manor was filled with villagers, estate workers, and various members of the local gentry. The atmosphere was thick with anticipation and apprehension. Kruger, dressed in his finest attire, stood beside the Baron's lawyer, a smug look on his face. He was confident that he would soon be declared the new master of the estate. Anna and Liesel entered the hall, their heads held high. Liesel carried the will, her hands trembling slightly, but her eyes filled with determination. They took their places near the front of the room, facing the assembled crowd. The Baron's lawyer, a portly man with a booming voice, cleared his throat and began to speak. He outlined the Baron's life, his accomplishments, and his dedication to the estate. Then, he announced that it was time to read the will. He took the document from Liesel and began to read, his voice echoing through the hall. He read the initial clauses, the ones that were unchanged, detailing the distribution of the Baron's personal belongings. Kruger listened intently, a glint of satisfaction in his eyes as he heard his name mentioned in connection with several valuable items. But then, the lawyer reached the section regarding the tenants, and his voice faltered. He looked up from the document, his brow furrowed in confusion. This can't be right," he stammered. "There must be some mistake." Kruger stepped forward, his eyes blazing with anger. "What is it?" he demanded. "What does the will say?" The lawyer, flustered, cleared his throat again and continued to read, slowly and deliberately, reciting the clauses that Liesel had altered. As he read each name, each guarantee, the tenants gasped, their faces lighting up with disbelief and joy. The Miller family beamed as they heard their rights to the water mill confirmed. The Schmidt family wept with relief as they learned that they would not be evicted from their home. The great hall erupted in murmurs of astonishment and gratitude. The tenants couldn't believe their ears. The stern old Baron, the man they had feared and respected, had shown such unexpected generosity. They looked at Liesel and Anna with newfound respect and affection. Kruger, however, was apoplectic. His face was contorted with rage, and his fists were clenched at his sides. He knew that his plans were ruined, that his dreams of power and wealth had been shattered. "This is a fraud," he shouted, his voice booming through the hall. "This will is a forgery. I demand that it be investigated." The lawyer, taken aback by Kruger's outburst, hesitated. He looked at Anna and Liesel, his expression questioning. Anna stepped forward, her voice calm and steady. "The will is authentic," she said, her eyes meeting the lawyer's gaze. "The Baron signed it himself, in my presence and in the presence of my stepdaughter Liesel." She then turned to the crowd, her voice ringing with conviction. "The Baron may have seemed stern and unyielding, but he had a good heart. He wanted to ensure the well-being of his tenants, to protect their rights and their livelihoods. This will is a testament to his generosity and his compassion." The tenants, swayed by Anna's words and by the evidence of their own ears, began to applaud. Their cheers filled the hall, drowning out Kruger's protests. The will was valid and their future was secure. Or so they thought. Despite the tenants' cheers, a few of the Baron's advisors, men who had long benefited from his more stringent policies, exchanged uneasy glances. They suspected that something was amiss, that the will they had just heard was not the will they had expected. They knew the Baron, and they found it hard to believe that he would suddenly become so generous. Kruger, fueled by his rage and desperation, seized upon their doubts. He approached the lawyer, whispering urgently in his ear. He pointed out inconsistencies in the wording, questioned the Baron's mental state, and demanded a thorough investigation. The lawyer, torn between his duty to uphold the law and his fear of upsetting the powerful men around him, agreed to conduct a cursory review of the will. He examined the signature, compared it to other documents, and consulted with legal experts. But no matter how closely they scrutinized the document, they could find no evidence of forgery or tampering. The signature was authentic, the language was legally sound, and there were no grounds to challenge the will. Frustrated and defeated, Kruger was forced to concede. The will stood, and the tenants were protected. As the crowd dispersed, Anna and Liesel exchanged a knowing glance. They had succeeded against all odds. They had used their knowledge, their courage, and their love to rewrite the Baron's legacy and create a more just and equitable world for the people of the estate. But they knew that their work was not yet finished. They still had to ensure that the will was enforced and that Kruger did not find a way to undermine its provisions. The fight for justice was far from over. Kruger, stripped of his power and influence, eventually left the estate, vowing revenge, but his threats were empty. Anna, as the Baron's widow, and Liesel, as his daughter, inherited the estate, and they were determined to honor the spirit of the altered will. Anna, with her wisdom and compassion, became a guiding force in the community. She established a school for the children of the tenants, ensuring that they had access to education regardless of their social standing. She also implemented fair labor practices, improved living conditions, and provided assistance to those in need. Liesel, now a young woman, used her knowledge of contracts and legal documents to protect the tenants from unscrupulous merchants and landowners. She became a champion of the poor and the oppressed, a voice for those who had been silenced. The hayloft, once their secret sanctuary, became a place where she met with tenants, listened to their concerns, and offered her assistance. Together, Anna and Liesel transformed the estate into a model of justice and compassion. The village prospered, the tenants thrived, and the name of von Hess became synonymous with fairness and kindness. And so, the mail-order bride and the Baron's daughter, two unlikely allies, rewrote not only a will but also the destiny of an entire community. They showed the world that even the smallest voice, armed with knowledge, courage, and love, can make a difference. They lived long and happy lives, forever remembered as the women who brought light and hope to the dark corners of the world. The stolen primer, a treasured reminder of their humble beginnings, remained in the hayloft, a symbol of the power of education and the enduring bond between a teacher and her student.